Hello, today we are talking about accommodation because separating from someone who is controlling, aggressive, and behaves like a spoilt 5-year-old when he doesn't get his own way is difficult at the best of times. But when you are stuck on a mortgage or a joint tenancy with them, it can take on a whole new level in the anxiety inducing stakes. Accommodation is either expensive or valuable depending on if you rent or if you own. The impact rental arrears has on your future ability to let another property is grave, and failure to pay your mortgage has ramifications far and beyond a late payment charge. Using the arrangement around a property is an extremely common tactic for retaining control over an ex-partner, and Mr. C was following the coercive controller textbook to the letter. Having left 6 times before, the issue of his home had come up before, and the fact that he had no contact with any of his family members meant that I knew that getting into a battle over the house with him would be one I wouldn't win and retain my sanity and conserve the energy I needed for the baby, so I didn't try. It would have meant making him homeless, and in the middle of a pandemic that wasn't an option, and anyway this house had been turned into a well-decorated prison by this point, and I had no desire to live there anymore. In fact, it was on this day 1 year ago that with everything that was going on with coronavirus and the customer who had delayed payment, I contacted our letting agent and I explained that we would be late on this month's rent. Do you know, at this point, I felt an obligation to make everything as smooth as possible to Mr. C, and he even remarked that he couldn't understand why anyone who said they had had enough and had no energy for him would be doing this, and that I must have a guilty conscience. Now, the truth was, I knew he wouldn't do anything about it, and I knew he had no qualms in racking up huge arrears and then pointing the finger and blaming me, all the while knowing I was the one on the joint tenancy and liable for half of it all. This was a long game, and I needed to plan my moves carefully. Leaving those times before had given me an opportunity to learn more and more about Mr. C, and whilst I don't believe it was all conscious thinking at the time, I had certainly toughened up and become a lot more aware of the levels he would stoop to when he wasn't getting his own way. Controlling the home and where you and the children live is another form of financial abuse, and despite me contacting the landlord and explaining our circumstances, he was resisting anything that remotely hinted at talking about the house. If it was brought up, he would fly off the handle about how he couldn't afford it on his own and that he wouldn't be able to rent anywhere. And there I was, sat in my ivory tower with my parents, and he was left to rot. And many other suitably dramatic comments that would deflect the conversation from anything remotely productive and leave me either reassuring him or trying to defend myself from his illogical slurs. As I was now exploring the Facebook groups and identifying characteristics in him right now and from the relationship that pointed towards him not only lacking emotional intelligence and rational thought and having absolutely no desire to handle this breakup in a calm, peaceful and constructive manner, I was starting to realise that there may be more to some of his traits than I'd first thought. Gradually, the smoke was lifting, and I was starting to realise that Mr. C had all the traits of someone who had an overwhelming sense of grandiose and severely lacked empathy. He was entitled, and he needed to feel admired. He displayed many traits that were narcissistic, and when I started to consider some of the tales he had told me about his behaviour in his youth, I was even starting to think he was sociopathic. With a still very limited knowledge and safe in the understanding that the letting agent understood the circumstances, as it were, I left the conversation about the house for another day. After all, I still didn't have any of mine or my daughter's clothes, toys or belongings at this point, and I was going to need to pick my battles and pick them wisely from now on. And today in the Facebook group, we're going to be talking about plans, we're going to be talking about communication strategies, and we're going to start to explore one communication strategy which is called grey rock. We're going to see how the grey rock communication technique links into my suspicions of narcissism and sociopathic abuse, because it's an important strategy that anyone who has to communicate with an abuser can find themselves feeling a lot more in control and a lot more prepared to do that. So please join us in the Facebook group. If you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. If you're watching on Instagram, hit the bell so you get notifications of another post. And if you're in the Facebook group, please join us in our discussions. Have a wonderful day, and I shall speak to you soon.